what I'm going to talk about is how you use these various technologies and platforms as part of a research cycle and where they fit in. It's not an inclusive collection of technologies or tools or ideas, but it gives you an idea of how they actually look across a research cycle from the point of discovery over through to metrics and analysis. So when you start a piece of research, if you're doing it at Sheffield, you'd be using tools like EndNote and Mendeley for your reference management collection, or if you wanted to use something open source, then you'd use Zotero. Mendeley is very good in that it's free and it gives you a social network of other academics and experts that you can connect with and start to share research. It also has a huge database of papers, references that you can search and add to your own collection. EndNote is very established, it's been around for a long time and has a lot of similarities with Mendeley. Zotero is free, open source, so invariably you're a bit more on your own, but there's a large community of people out there that are helping you understand and use these tools. One of the most important things you can do if you've not already done it is get an Orchid ID. So an Orchid ID it's a unique number that you get a page, it takes 5 minutes to set up your Orchid ID. And that allows you to submit to journals with your ID. It allows you to apply to funders with this unique ID. And how that actually kind of works is it sets you apart from everyone else. So if you've got a very similar name to somebody else, your Orchid ID is unique. If you change name through marriage or through other reasons, again, that unifies all of your outputs and research in one place. If you're dealing with data, it's important that you have a data management plan. DMP Online is a site that allows you to put in a data management plan and print it off. This is particularly useful for anyone who's collecting any data. If you're doing it as part of a thesis or your master's, or if you're doing it as a researcher, then going onto there, it simplifies various areas of your data collection in a form that you can then export and print. And again, that's very useful for when you're sharing data afterwards, because what often happens is that we store data and there's not any supplementary or complementary literature to go with it. So your data doesn't make much sense if it's just a collection of tables and spreadsheets. So again, this is something that it's the kind of the cookbook to your data. So as you start to kind of communicate and share your research, a place to go obviously is Twitter. You've probably been told to use Twitter, encouraged to use it. Now, building up your Twitter profile does take some time, but if you're not out there communicating your research, if you're not out letting people know what you're doing, then how do they know about it? So, starting as you mean to go on is a good way to get out there and communicate. And a good dashboard to use with Twitter is TweetDeck. It's owned by Twitter, it's free. Where you can use TweetDeck can very much work with your reference management at the start. You can put in keywords, and what it does, it creates search channels. So you can put in a keyword. So if your research is around Ebola or HIV, you can create searches, and tweets relating to those keywords will come down each particular channel. So it's a way of doing automated, real-time searches for people who are talking about these topics, but also potentially sharing research, also potentially interested in the work that you're doing. So you're trying to build a social network. Another social network that you can use is LinkedIn. LinkedIn doesn't work for everybody in academia. It's more for people working in professional areas of work, but it is a way to connect with those people. So if you're wanting to connect with clinicians, if you're wanting to connect with health professionals, people in the NHS, people in the World Health Organization, if you want to connect with people in the pharmaceutical industries, then LinkedIn is a place where you can go and you can connect with those people, and there are groups where there are discussions and conversations. For a lot of people in academia, LinkedIn has a very, very limited output as to what it can do to help you, but it may have some benefits. Another potential and more left field area is to look at Reddit. So Reddit is a huge site for collating and curating what is interesting and what is hot on the internet. It's an upvoting site, so people vote things up, they vote things down. And there's a large community of academics on there. The new scientific journal on Reddit is a place where there are millions of people interested in academia, academics who ask questions. They host Ask Me Anything Reddits on there, and it's something to go and explore. It's very hard to explain in the space of a minute, but it is worth going and having a look at as a place where perhaps you could share and disseminate your research. Important to remember with things like Reddit and Twitter is netiquette. So if you go jumping in and start shouting me, and here's all my stuff, people can get a little bit wary of that. So it's important to go in a more kind of discursive way and have a discussion, find out things rather than just jump in straight away and start sharing things, because people want to have more of a dialogue. Now, if you're thinking about how you turn your research into something visual, there are loads of tools out there that will do that really well. Canva is a really good tool for creating posters, presentations, reports. It's a drag and drop tool. The free version is limited in what you can do in terms of the number of images and graphics, but there are lots of graphic sites out there that you can utilize. If you do a search for free vectors or free clip arts or free PNG files, then you'll find lots of little images that you can utilize. You may have to attribute them, so it's important to see what licenses you're using these things under, but it is a good place to start and just build a more visual identity, because people quite often, especially when we're looking on Twitter, you're looking at a stream of text, and to have something that's a little bit more visual, a bit more striking, can draw extra attention to what you're doing. Pictochart is a really good tool. It's worth potentially paying for the educational license, which is around $39 a year. So it's very good value, and that allows you to create infographics, very much drag and drop, lots of vectors already in there. They're little images that have been designed, so that can be an image of a man, a woman, of anything, and you can bring it in, design your own color scheme, put your own text in, and it's pretty much foolproof. It's one of those tools that half an hour of playing around with, you start to get some idea. Now, the thing to remember with a lot of these tools, when they're free, they are limited sometimes in how you can export things out. So you can go in, spend a few hours making the most wonderful infographic, to find that when you actually want to print it out for a conference, it's not going to scale up, and that's when you may need to pay for a better version. Another very good infographic tool, and there are dozens out there, but another good one is Infogram. Infogram is very good if you're wanting to do geographical presentations and posters. So they have default built geographical areas, regions, London boroughs, the UK, the world, Africa, Asia, and you can go in and build these maps by putting data in that will affect how these maps look. Now, that costs money to do those elements. You can do things with the free version. Again, it's one of those go and spend an hour having a play with, see if it works for you. But to do anything substantial, you're going to need to pay out for it. Adobe Spark and Adobe Post. Adobe Post allows you to do very much what Canva allows you to do, and again, it's free. The Adobe free kind of packages like that are very, very good. But Adobe Spark is an animation tool, and this allows you to make very simple, quick animations. And when I say very quick and simple, I'm talking you can make yourself a very nice little animated presentation that looks like an animated PowerPoint using kind of free vectors in the space of 30 minutes. The key thing to remember is script your animations. Whenever you make any kind of animation, I mean, this video here isn't scripted, I'm speaking ad-libbed. It'd be very hard to script this kind of thing. But if you were making something where you're not on the video, then if you script it, it just means that you are concise, you say everything that you need to say, you don't go off on tangents, and it keeps your videos nice and short. And Adobe Spark is a very good way to make short, very effective, cheap, low cost animated videos. They're not going to be all bells and whistles. I'm sure you've seen research videos out there that do the most wonderful animations, etc. But invariably they cost a lot of time, and they can cost a lot of money if you're having to bring in expert services. So these are things you can learn yourself and you can use yourself. VideoScribe is a really good tool by Sparkle. That makes the kind of those like RSA animated ones where they're hand drawn and everything moves and animates into each other. The learning curve for that is a little bit higher than Adobe Spark, and it comes at a cost. So you get a free 7-day license trial. So I suggest you try that, but make sure that you actually record the video when you've got the 7 days. Don't sign up for it with good intention, let a week go by and then panic and have to do it on that last day. So do it when you actually sign up for it, when you actually are going to make the video. And again, these work like Adobe Spark, they work frame by frame. So each line, so if I say a line now, as I have, that is a segment. Then the next one is recorded, then the next one. So you don't have to speak in one go. So you cannot get it wrong, and I guarantee you can't get it wrong. Lumen 5 is a really nice animated video tool. The free version allows you to make very short, nice little animated videos with no talking, just music, which comes with the package. The video footage comes with the package. It's all sort of royalty free within the package. To get access to the really good content and to remove branding, you've got to pay for it, and that becomes a little bit more expensive. But the free version will do really well. And you can export a link straight out and put it into Twitter. So you don't have to go and host it on YouTube, although you can download it and put it into YouTube. Podcasting is still really very popular, and it's something to consider. A podcast is again very, very cheap and effective. You can make it here if you're in Sheffield. You can make it in our podcasting suite, record them in the creative media unit, or you could even just record them at home if you've actually got the setup to do so. You could record them onto your phone. The thing to remember is the audio quality is essential. So if you're going to record any of these videos or podcasts and you're doing it on the bus, there's going to be a lot of background noise. It's not going to be nice for people to listen to in the headphones. So it's important to think about where you record these. So if you make an Adobe Spark video, do it in a quiet place, perhaps in a back bedroom at home. And again, Adobe Spark works very well with iPad as well as desktop, so you can record it on an iPad, find a nice comfortable location and space. And the same with podcasts. It's something to consider, part of this thing as we move along the research cycle. And again, as you're making these things, don't forget to share them. Twitter, again, is this avenue where you can start to share things out that you're making these creations. Now, as you're going along, building up a research career, or as part of a research career, you're in it, you're out presenting. You may be presenting at a student conference, or you may be giving a keynote at an international conference, wherever you are in the stage of your career. Now, to get a bit more longevity out of your presentations, using tools like SlideShare, which is owned by LinkedIn, gives you a place where you can host your presentations. The good thing about this is if you're on Twitter, you can go give your presentation, and you could schedule a tweet using TweetDeck about your presentation, which links to the presentation that's uploaded onto SlideShare. So you're kind of trying to maximize that visibility, because not everybody's looking at Twitter all the time. Not everybody's at the conference that you're at. So you can host it up there. It takes 5 minutes to set up an account. It takes 5 minutes to upload and tag and put a description in for your presentation. It's just like putting up a YouTube video. It's important to think about copyright, images that you might be using. So I'll talk about that in a very short while. But again, think about the content that you may be putting up there. And with presentations, and if you are a student, if you're doing a PhD and you've got early results, then you may not wish to share them. So not everything can be shared. So even though this is about sharing and using technologies, there are certain things that you can't share, And you may need to check if you have a funder, you may need to check what you can say and what you can do with your funder as well. So it's important to remember that. And the same with data. So one thing to pay heed to, which most academics don't, is Creative Commons. Creative Commons is a two-way street. It is a copyright movement that allows people to create and share resources under various Creative Commons licenses. So the CC BY license that allows you to share things as long as people attribute it, in the same way that if you take someone's research and use it in your research, you cite it. It's about giving credit for work. And you can take content and use it. So that's images, that's video, that's audio, it's sounds, but again, you need to credit. So you may make content that you will release under Creative Commons. So you may write a blog article that's published Creative Commons. You may publish a journal article, open access journal, and it may be released under a Creative Commons license. There are others, Creative Commons share alike, Creative Commons non-commercial. That's when you want to stop people from utilizing your materials in a commercial setting, especially if you're not making any money off it. And there are examples where people have written things, they've not put it under a non-commercial, and it's been taken and put in a book and sold, and there's no kind of particular comeback to that. So as you publish, one of the issues is predatory journals and predatory conferences. These are journals that don't have the scruples or the morals of most journals, and they are purely there to make money. They are not interested in scholarly communications. They're not interested in getting your research to the right people. And what they'll do is they'll publish your research, usually through no peer review, which is a red flag that you need to watch out for. They'll charge you a fee, which can be quite often cheaper than some of the major publishers, but once you've put it on there, it's very hard to get it out. There's a site called Think, Check, Submit, and that is a site where you can check. So it asks, are you submitting your research to a trusted journal? Is it the right journal for your work? Check, use the checklist to assess the journal, and only if you can answer yes to the questions on our checklist, then you submit. So go have a look at Think, Check, Submit. There's also one for conferences. Now, as you produce research and materials, you will generate unique IDs, DOIs, PubMed IDs, but a DOI is a digital object identifier. So as you write your first journal paper or your 100th journal paper, it will have these. And these are things that you communicate. So when you're sharing on Twitter, when you're posting things on LinkedIn, ensure you have the DOI. DOIs can also be applied to data. So a data set can have a DOI. And this comes from when you host things. So as you create materials and as you're creating research, then there are places where you will host them that are not necessarily a journal publisher. And one place for data is Figshare. Mendeley also hosts data. There are others that host data. So Figshare is a site where you can upload anything. Let's say if you've got an institutional one, which we have, you can go through that as a member of staff. If you're not aligned to an institution or don't have access to that, then you can create your own Figshare account. And this is a repository of anything. So it can be a conference proceeding, it can be an abstract, it can be a blog post, it can be a video, it can be a protocol, it can be a data set. Anything that you feel would be beneficial to host and share, and it generates a DOI. So the DOI is something that then becomes trackable and usable. So it becomes an entity in its own right. At Sheffield, we've got the White Rose repository. This is for hosting all of our traditional journal paper outputs. So these are the pre-publication author's manuscripts for the most part, or in cases, the gold open access versions. And this is a way to put all of our work into one place that people can find and access. So the White Rose repository is Leeds, York and the University of Sheffield together and hosting that material. Now, if you don't have access to that, because not everybody does, then there are other sites out there. ResearchGate will host that, as well as other print archives. And say there's a lot of tools that I've not mentioned on here because we'll be here all day as I go along, so it's a lot to cover. ResearchGate has a lot of traction. It's very global. You get a lot of people from areas who cannot access traditional Western academic journal databases, so they want to get hold of what versions they can, invariably an author's manuscript version. Now, the thing to consider with ResearchGate is it doesn't have the checks and balances that something like the White Rose repository would have. So the White Rose repository has got librarians and professionals who check the legitimacy of articles that are added in, and it's to rule out any illicit materials, things that we are not allowed to host, versions we're not allowed to host. ResearchGate doesn't really have those checks and balances. It's very good for building a profile. It has its own metrics, which is to some extent a black box, so it's hard to figure out how they're generated, but it does have traction. And if you're on there, you will find people will approach you quite often from Asia, from Africa, places who don't have the access to certain other sites to request authors' manuscripts of the copy. Now, as you generate content, you may then start to communicate in other ways. The conversation is a blog that our universities signed up to and some universities signed up to. Started in Australia, launched in the UK, launched in the US, launched in Africa. This pairs journalists up with academics to write articles around their research or recent publications and outputs that they've delivered. It's a very good way to work with the media because it gives you a kind of a one-to-one approach to creating communicative outputs to a more lay audience. It's important that you are happy with what's published because the journalist may try and get you to say certain things that you in a certain way that you don't want to say, but usually for the most part you'll kind of it'll be an easy and smooth, effective way of working. A good way to work with a conversation is if you know that there's particular hot topics at the moment. So let's say if there's hopefully not, but if there was like another Ebola outbreak and you were doing research in Ebola, then the conversation would want articles on Ebola and you would then step in and publish that. And a good example was in the last Ebola outbreak, there was a student here at Sheffield who was doing research to gorillas and wrote a piece about the impact of Ebola on gorillas because it has an effect on them and pitched that to the conversation. It was a unique slant on a very big story, was accepted, and that article received just under 200,000 views. Brilliant publicity to that researchers, to early career researchers' work, and gave them a good step into communicating. There are more specialist ones. You know, if you're working in our field, in health research, then there are lots of BMJ blogs. And again, it's worth just approaching them. It's worth having an approach to see whether you can communicate and whether they'll accept it. Again, it's important when you're communicating this kind of work to be certain that you can communicate, that you're not releasing early results that you can't, that your funder may not have any objections to that, so you may need to check. If you're doing something like a fellowship, you may need to check with your funder as to what you can do. And you can go onwards and upwards. You know, you can go and write for something like The Guardian. There's specialist blogs for The Guardian, and academics do regularly like for things like The Guardian. So it's a good place to go. Also, stories that get published on The Conversation are published under Creative Commons. So they do get run. So I've written a few times for The Conversation, and they've appeared on the World Health Economic Forum. They've appeared on CNN. So they can appear in other places. Now, in terms of measurements, etc., something to look at is Altmetrics. There's various sites out there. Impact Story being one. Another is Altmetric. We have this at Sheffield, and this allows you to check the metrics and the kind of the impact and the reach of the work that started back here and has gone along, and it checks it trawls the internet for thousands of sites, thousands of news sites, blog sites, policy documents. It trawls Wikipedia for citations. This is why it's important that you have your DOI, because without your DOI or without a PubMed ID, none of that gets tracked. So Altmetrics will track that, it will collate it, and it will collate that attention into one place, and you get to see. Now the important thing is it generates a number. Don't get too hung up about the number unless the number is 0. If the number is 0, then it means you're not getting any attention to what you've created, or you're not communicating it through all of these channels, through these blogs, through Guardian, etc., using the DOI. There's nothing that's being tracked as part of it. Kudos is another great site, and what Kudos does is they collate that attention. They help you to write lace summaries. You can get a free account, and it gets you to think about your research perhaps in a more qualitative way. Altmetrics thinks more quantitative, but it still tells a story. It still tells us information geographically and attention-wise and through platforms. Kudos does this just in a little bit of a similar, in a different way. And one thing you could also try and do is go and edit Wikipedia. You can create a Wikipedia account for free. Now, the one thing you don't want to do is go onto Wikipedia and try and create your own page, because that's just going to get blocked. If you try and go in and create your own research topic, again, that's really very hard to do. But if you are an expert in your area of research, you've published in there, then you may go in and edit a Wikipedia page. It's free to create an account. There's lots of tutorials there that will show you how to do it. But again, you've got to be a bit wary as to going in. It's a bit like Reddit. If you suddenly start jumping in and trying to push something towards your agenda, you're going to get knocked back, you're going to get potentially blocked. But Wikipedia, it has tremendous traction. It's in the top 10 websites globally according to the Alexa stats, and it is increasingly used by academics, and we know it's used by pretty much everybody who has access to the internet. So it helps academics contribute to the scientific conversation and communications. And you know, and whatever you're doing, Twitter again helps you share everything that you're doing. If you write for any of these blogs, tweet it, share it, build your network up. So what we have here is, I won't say so much a research cycle, because they're not specific tools to allow you to do your actual research, particularly if you were based in labs and you might be using electronic lab books, etc. But what you've got here is some way of thinking about how this pans along, starting back from your reference management and getting that Orchid ID, to having a data management plan online, to thinking about building those networks, thinking about creative ways to share your content, to think about those kind of issues around DOIs and where you submit to journals and making things Creative Commons, to think about where you're hosting it, think about the communications, the metrics, and that kind of global outreach. Hopefully that helps you think about using technology and how you'll use it as part of your research.